Hello and welcome to this lecture where we would be trying some more PowerShell commands on when it comes to automation with Active Directory. So in the previous video we had used the Get-ADUser command to explore how to view properties of a user, and we explored how to filter some of those properties so you don't get all the total of information that you don't need, and you can only filter and select whatever you want, and you can even save them to a file and view them so that they can be shared with other users. In this video we're going to start exploring how to create users in Active Directory. So basically in the past, in other videos, normally you'd go to wherever you want to create the user, and then you go to new and go to new user, and then you fill in all the information and all that, which is a manual process. So how do we use PowerShell to create a new user and view its properties, and maybe make some modifications on the account? This isn't the case of just one user. In the next video we'll be exploring how to create users in bulk. Before we know how to create users in bulk, let's understand how it works first when you're exploring it from a single user point of view, right? So I'm just going to close this. So I'm in my PowerShell now, and basically, like I said, best practice, you'd want to always make sure that you're in the home directory. So come out of the administrator directory. So cd, right, and then we'll import module. It's already imported, but it's just best practice to always make sure that you've imported the module. I'll clear this. Now, to create a user, the command we are looking for is called New-ADUser. And when you create a New-ADUser, the minimum requirement is at least the user should have a logon name. So we'll start with the command New-ADUser. I'm using the tab to autocomplete. So when I go to New-ADUser, and we need to specify, say, the logon name, and the name is, let's say for instance, the name is Joseph, and we need to give the minimum requirement, which is a user principal name. So we use the user principal name switch, and we would say it's Joseph at, say, extrashare.local. So this is our account that we want to create. So I hit return, and you'd realize that not only is really showing, but if you go to Active Directory to view that, to search for Joseph, you'd realize that it exists. But we want to be more familiar with using PowerShell rather than going through the graphic user interface using the snapping. So assuming you've created a new user now, in the previous video we explored how to use the command to find information on users, so the get command. So we're going to use the get to view information on the user. So we use Get-ADUser, and we'll just specify Joseph because we just literally created Joseph, and it tells us that at least we have the CN attribute as Joseph, and it's in the container users by default, and it has the right domain controller and the DC attributes, extrashare and local. But you can see that by default, if you create an account like this, PowerShell will keep it as disabled, and it has a name, Joseph, and it has its object class user. You can see that it has no surname, so it's just a basic account creation process without any details. So this is how quickly you can just create a user in Active Directory. So we've satisfied the minimum requirements. So since the account is disabled, ideally, like an account needs to be enabled for it to be able to be used. But when you're using the PowerShell approach, you'd have to set a password before the account will be enabled. So in the next phase, let's explore how do we set an account password for a new user that's created. For instance, in the case of Joseph. To set a password for Joseph, we need to use a command called set-AD-AccountPassword. So just put in the set-AD account password, and the switch that can link the password command that we want to set to the user is called the identity switch. So identity, I'll just type in and use the tab to complete. And we need to now specify who is the identity, who is the user that we want to set the password to. So we would type in Joseph's name and we hit return. And we are being asked to put in the password. Now, this password that we are being asked is the current password. But when we created an account, we didn't set a password, so it means the password is going to be blank. So the current password for this account, we'll leave it blank. So to leave it blank, just hit return, and then you're now being asked to enter the desired password. So I'll put in my desired password, and you have to type it twice. So now the password is created. So let's view the account again. I'll use my tab key to go to the previous command. And we can see that it's still disabled because the value for enabled is false. So now that at least we know that the password is set, if we go and attempt to enable the account using PowerShell, it shouldn't give us any problems. To enable the account, we need to use a command called enable account. And then we'll pipe it through a switch, which is identity, and target it to Joseph. So enable account, enable AD account, and we'll pipe it through the switch identity, and then Joseph. Now that's the command, and we can get the user again, and now the enabled value is true. So this is how you basically create a user using PowerShell, using the minimum approach. You haven't set any OUs, you haven't set any groups, you haven't specified the surname, you haven't done anything in details with regards to the accounts. Now, this is Joseph, and let's say we wanted to create the account with one command that would also include a password. So instead of going through the steps, I was just going through the steps to basically show you how structurally the PowerShell interacts with ActiveDirectory. So all this could be put in a simple command, which would create the user for you and make sure the account is enabled. And normally to do that, is basically you have to put all these commands that we put in separately, you have to put it all into one line of command. So in this case, let's say we want to create a new user called, let's say, we'll call the user Jane. And we'll start by typing the New-ADUser command. New-ADUser, and the logon name is Jane, and the user principal name would be Jane at abstracts here .local, and then the path where we want the user to go. Let's say we want to give it, so this path that we're going to specify It's going to contain strings of characters that will specify exactly the path. So normally you want to put that in inverted commas so that it reads it as a string, and it can take the string value and filter through the whole Active Directory service and make sure that it finds those specific groups and OUs and stuff like that and then put them right. So start with, say, OU. And let's say the OU, we want to put the OU in, we want to put Jane in, let's say, ICT department. So before you do that, it means you should already have an OU that's created for that. So I would give it ICT department OU, ICT, just gonna make this bigger. ICT department, and the DC is extra ship, DC local. I think that should be enough. At least we know it's going to go in directly into the ICT department OU, and the other parameters, which are the distinguish name parameters that are needed. So now that we have specified the path and we have confirmed what domain it belongs to, we need to now include a password and then make sure that the account is enabled. When it comes to password, the switch you're looking for is AccountPassword. And whenever you activate the switch, the password switch, normally you want to make sure that whatever you're going to put in as a password has certain parameters that PowerShell wants to make sure that you have in place. Like, for instance, the password needs to be hashed properly. It needs to be hashed using a module, or it needs to be hashed using a secure string to make sure that it can't be hacked or it can't be seen by anyone who probably gets access to the PowerShell interface. So we'll use a read host. And we want to use this other switch, which is as. So read the password as a secure string. And the password will be contained in this secure string we'll call it AccountPassword. Close the brackets. And then this needs to pass through whatever follows, which is, so we're going to pipe this output, and then we'd say take all this output and then check and make sure everything is accurate, and then enable the account. Enable AD account. Right? So there is the script to create a new user that would just create the name and the user principal name. It will put in the right OU, and it would allow you to just input whatever password you want to put, and then it would create the account for you. So I'm just going to hit return, and we are being asked the account password. So I'll give it this password. Now that the account is created, we can use the get user flag, the get user command, get AdUser, and Jane. You can see that the account is enabled, and you can see that it's in the ICT department OU. And well, she doesn't have a surname, but she has this user principal name. So if we go to Active Directory, and I'm just gonna refresh this. We have the ICT department OU, we have Jane. When I go into Jane, she doesn't have a lot of details. She doesn't have first name, last name, and all that. So these are things that you could actually create the command to have all these details that you want filled in the case of one account. But normally when you're doing it for one account, you wouldn't want to go through that detail. Normally we are talking about the content of automation. So there's a way that when you're doing bulk import, when you're using a bulk creation, you can specify all those information. But this is just to show you how PowerShell works. When I go to account here, we have Jane logon name, and we have ActiveDirectory.local, and this is basic stuff, and it has a password that counts as enabled. So that's how you create an account with just a simple command. So what if you want to modify a single account, for instance, this Jane account? So Jane doesn't have a surname. Jane doesn't have a given name. So let's say we want to specify given name, and we want to specify, say, surname. Or let's say we want to give it an email address. Let's say we want to find out if she has some specific information on most of those things. To do that, you can use the same Get-ADUser Jane, and then you build upon it. So if you want to find information on a specific user to see, does the user have that information? For instance, let's say an email address. So Jane, for instance, that we have created, we know doesn't have an email address. Let's say you just want to find a way of validating that using PowerShell. You can use the Get-ADUser, and then you start off from Jane. And then what you want to do is you want to just modify it and give it a switch. You want to give it a switch. No, actually, because you want to find out what information is available for a specific attribute, you use the Get-ADUser, but then you use the identity switch, and then you specify the logon name, which is Jane, and then you say you're looking for a specific property. Properties. Just use the tab key to make it correct. Let's say email address. And you can see that it returns some information, including what we're looking for, which is the email address. So it's null. So let's say you found out that it doesn't have the email address information. So now you want to actually set an email address. That's when you use a set command. So you use set AdUser tab, and I'll say Jane. So we are setting Jane, and we'll switch it to the email address, and then we'll just give the email address straight away. So say it's Jane at, say, ActiveDirectory.com. Hit return, and then we'll get to the user again, email address, and now you can see that we have the email address Jane at ActiveDirectory.com. And if you go and view her account, you'd realize now she has Jane at ActiveDirectory.com. So just to give you some information on how to, get information on a user, specific user, and maybe make changes or modify specific attributes, these are the commands that you want to be playing around with. And I would be adding that resource to this module, to this lecture, which you can play around with. If you've been following along and you've set up the lab and you have the whole server running, you can use this command as you see fit. One final thing before we go is, say what if you wanted to see all the information on, say you wanted to find out how many users are in a specific OU. Say you wanted to generate a report and share with someone who asks, how many members do we have? How many members do we have in this department? And how many members do we have in this OU? And let's say you want to create an Excel of those. So for instance, in this ICT department OU, we have 3 members. So let's say you wanted to find a way to find that information using PowerShell. You can use the Get-UserID, Get-ADUser. But then this time around, you're using a different switch called search base. And then you need to specify the path where you want to go and search. So we are looking for, say, OU is equal to, say, ICT department. And we need to give it the correct path. Let's go to extras here. And DC is equal to local. And we'll close the inverted commas. So we want to get a user, but to get that user, search in this specific OU and in this specific domain. And then we want you to filter all information on the users in that OU, and then pipe whatever output you get and only give us their names. So say we want to select just the name attribute. So just the name of the users in the ICT department OU. Hit return. That doesn't work. Looks like we used the wrong switch indicator. So let's see, FL. That's the wrong one. Not sure how. Okay, I think I see what the problem is. I typed in the domain controller wrong. So the DC is local. My bad, my mistake. And then we want to use select. Hit return. Okay. So we have the names, Jake Peralta, Patrick, and Jane. So you can add other attributes you're looking for in whatever you're looking for. So for instance, if we wanted to know what their department information is, say department. So they're supposed to be in the ICT department. So when I go to department and then we hit return, so their departments are null. And if it is a problem where you want to make sure that obviously everyone in the ICT department needs to have their department as ICT, so you need to find a way of modifying the department attributes for these 3 people. So you can just build upon this. And when it comes to bug editing, that's something we'll be looking into in the coming videos. So I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.